How y'all doing? It's me, Rajan. Just wanted to make this talk short real quick because today is Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. It's a day that we celebrate his life and the things that he's done, the things that he did for all of us people, especially people of color, who we do make a point of it to honor him on this day. But I wanted to make sure that on this day we not only remember his legacy, but also the legacy of the other people who may be lesser known individuals who had a great role in the civil rights movement. So if you give me 1 second, I'm going to share this out, and then I'm going to share this quick speech with you guys. Some of it's going to be written, and some of it is going to be stuff that is just off the top from the heart. So give me 1 second while I share this out. What's up, Lucretia? Alright, so like I said, the purpose of the video is to talk about not only Dr. King, who we are honoring this day with Martin Luther King Day, but also to discuss the contributions of other African Americans who fought for us during the civil rights movement. Now, of course, this won't be the complete list of all of them, because there were so many people. There's no way we could tell all the stories of all the people who had a role in the civil rights movement, but this is just a few of the names. First of all, of course, we're talking about today's honoree, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was born on January 15, 1929, and was killed on April 4th, 1968. There's a lot of things we forget about his life after his death. We forget that a lot of people who considered him an enemy became instant fans of Dr. King after his death. Lyndon B. Johnson, for example, who he had lots of intense interactions with throughout the creation and approval of the Civil Rights Bill and Voters' Rights Bill. He actually has lost all contact with him in that last year of his life. It's well known that J. Edgar Hoover had lots of files. He tapped his phone. He'd sent him hate mail. He'd done all these things to tear him down and to make people in the public see him as less than a great man. He wanted people to see him as a philanderer. He wanted people to see him as a communist. He wanted people to see him as an evil person who was asking for too much, when the truth was that all he wanted was equal rights for all people, no matter if you were rich, poor, white, black, purple, orange, or blue. But he fought for those things. But the thing we forget also about Dr. King is he was a husband. He had a wife, the beautiful, wonderful Miss Coretta Scott King. He was a father. He had many children who, honestly, if you look at their story right now, I'm pretty sure he wouldn't be too proud of the things that he's seeing between them as far as the bickering goes. He's also the founder of the Southern Christian Leadership Council. All right? He fought, but at the end of the day, he fought for the civil rights of people of color as well as the rights of poor people everywhere. His career achievements: he received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. He received the Presidential Medal of Freedom posthumously in 1977. He received the Congressional Gold Medal in 2004 for his contributions to civil rights of all people as well. He's also, if you haven't been to the National Mall in Washington, D.C., he also has a statue that's extremely tall. And if you haven't seen it yet, you need to. It's an amazing statue. But like I said, I wanted to make sure I shed light on some lesser-known characters that also had a great deal to do with the civil rights movement. So I'm going to be reading a little bit. So if you see me looking away, I'm just providing information. Hopefully, you can let kids who may not know about these people watch this video, and they'll also hear about the great things that these people did. I'll start with Ida B. Wells. Ida B. Wells was born in 1862. She was born to slaves and became an author, journalist, and co-founder of the NAACP. She was a teenager. When she was a teenager, her parents died of yellow fever, and she fought to keep her younger siblings together and care for them. She became a teacher in a segregated school at 16 and spread the word about terrible conditions and inadequate resources for black students. In 1891, 3 of her friends in Memphis who'd opened a grocery store that took black customers away from an established white grocery store were lynched. That sparked her desire to research lynchings. She found that contrary to what white newspapers said, lynchings weren't prompted by the rapes of white women. They were more commonly a response to public drunkenness, economic competition with whites, and displaying attitudes and behaviors that whites perceived as uppity. Also, Wells found lynchings were more common in years of financial hardship when cotton was less profitable. White newspaper editors were furious at her for her reporting. Once wrote, "The fact that a black scoundrel is allowed to live is a volume of evidence to the wonderful patience of Southern whites. But we've had enough of it." In the face of Southern threats to her life, Wells said, "I felt that one had a better die fighting against injustice than to die like a dog or a rat in a trap." A book that you can share with her about your kids is Ida B. Wells' Let the Truth Be Told by Walter Dean Myers. It's illustrated by Bonnie Christensen. If you're interested in finding out more about her, that's a book to look up. Let the Truth Be Told by Walter Dean Myers. So that was Ida B. Wells, one of the lesser-known civil rights leaders. Another civil rights leader that is lesser known and not talked about as much, Mr. John Lewis. I believe he's now a senator. He's a House of Representatives, a congressman. John Lewis was born in 1940. He's a legend, the last living keynote speaker at the 1963 March on Washington. He grew up in rural Alabama, met Martin Luther King Jr., and became involved in student activism, and was the youngest speaker at the March on Washington. In 1965, he was beaten into unconsciousness by white cops and state troopers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge during the march from Selma to Montgomery. "I gave a little blood on that bridge," he said. "I thought I saw death." But as white Americans watched police gassing and smashing the skulls of nonviolent protesters, an arc of history began to bend toward justice. You can talk to kids about how Lewis is still fighting today. He represents Georgia in the House of Representatives, and last year he led a sit-in on the House floor after Senator Chris Murphy spearheaded a 15-hour filibuster in favor of common sense gun control. Currently, Lewis is in the vanguard of the fight against confirmation of Jeff Sessions. So Jeff Sessions has been approved. So this has been written since then. How you doing, everybody? So that's John Lewis, another lesser-known civil rights leader. If you want to find more about him, you can read. What's that? I'm sorry. Look him up if you're interested in finding out more information about John Lewis. But he's currently serving as a congressman for the state of Georgia. All right. 3. Claudette Colvin. All right. 1939. Claudette Colvin was a 15-year-old girl in 1955 when she refused to give up her seat in Montgomery, Alabama, to a white passenger. 9 months before, Rosa Parks did the same thing. But civil rights leaders felt that Colvin, a kid who'd been in trouble and had been called mouthy and emotional, wasn't a good face for the movement. Rosa Parks, a respectable older married lady, was better. Colvin wound up with a police record after being yanked off the bus, manhandled, cuffed, and jailed. To make matters worse, she soon got pregnant by an older man and was expelled from school. She never got the support. Sorry, I lost my place. She never got the support she should have from grown civil rights leaders. Still, she eventually testified at the case that ended segregated buses. If you want to read more about her, you can read Claudette Colvin, Twice Toward Justice. It's a spectacularly reported book. Okay? And like I said, I'm giving you guys the stories of lesser-known civil rights leaders on Martin Luther King Day. We don't want to forget about those people who worked alongside Dr. King in one way or another. The 4th is Ruby Bridges, born in 1954. Ruby Bridges was the first black child to desegregate the New Orleans public schools. The very youngest children will understand how scary this must have been for a 6-year-old and how brave she was. Her book, Through My Eyes, will resonate with kids 7 and up. And beginning readers 5 and up will appreciate the story of Ruby Bridges by Robert Coles. Because white parents wouldn't let their children learn with Ruby, she had one-on-one lessons with a younger teacher. Parents can talk about why most schools, including their own kids probably, are still so segregated. and what Americans can do to change that. I know that me and my students, we have that book in my classroom, and my students read it every year. And every year we talk about, Miss Bridges and the things that she had to endure. Again, Martin Luther King was not the only one. So let's, we want to make sure that we are shedding light on all of the civil rights leaders on this King Day, because this King Day is a celebration not only of Dr. King, but of the things that he sought to accomplish and the people that he worked with to accomplish them. My fifth person is Ella Baker. Ella Baker was like many women. Sorry, she was born in 1903. She was like many women, an active player behind the scenes of history who never got the credit she deserved. She grew up in North Carolina and moved to New York City to work in social justice. She knew that the economic parity was essential for equality and once said, "People cannot be free until there is enough work in this land to give everybody a job." In the 1940s, she worked for the NAACP. She moved to Atlanta to help King establish the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. She was most interested in working with young activists and was one of the people who helped organize the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which helped create Freedom Summer. She said of herself, "You didn't see me on television. You didn't see news stories about me. The kind of role I tried to play was to pick up pieces or put together pieces out of which I hoped organization might come." That perspective was how she got the nickname Fundi, a Swahili word for someone who teaches a craft or the next generation. Alas, another reason she was perhaps less publicly lauded than she should have been was that the civil rights movement was largely modeled on the black church, with its male leadership and female congregants. In fact, no woman was a featured speaker at the March on Washington. Gloria Washington, a Maryland activist, was told she'd be given a 2-minute speech, but her chair was taken off stage and her microphone was whisked away when she got to the podium. Even Rosa Parks and Lena Horne were escorted off stage before Dr. Martin Luther King spoke. So that's something else that is important to know about our history in civil rights. It was not kind to women in a lot of ways. Today, New York City has a well-regarded, diverse, progressive public school named after her. But if there's a great children's book about her, I can't find it. So someone write one. So if you want to write about Ella Baker, please look her up and do some research on her. Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie Lou Hamer was born on Mississippi Plantation. She was the last of 20 children of a poor sharecropper. 20 children, Jesus. In 1961, when she was in a hospital to have a small tumor removed, she was sterilized without her consent or knowledge. Doctors could legally do that to poor black women then. The procedure was colloquially known as a Mississippi appendectomy. In 1962, after learning that she had the right to vote, she went to try to register along with a small group of her neighbors. After being made to jump through hoops, they were turned away. On the way home, the group's bus was pulled over by police. Sorry, I lost my place. For being the wrong color. The passengers were terrified until Hamer began to sing. She sang hymns like "This Little Light of Mine" and civil rights songs, and she made her fellow activists feel better. But upon her return to the plantation where she lived, she worked as a bookkeeper. She was fired and kicked out of her house. Still, she kept up her activism. Despite being brutally beaten, assaulted, and threatened, in 1964 she spoke to the Credentials Committee at the Democratic National Convention asking, "Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off the hooks because our lives are threatened daily, because we want to live as decent human beings?" Hamer's story is showcased in the poetic, lyrical Voice of Freedom, Fannie Lou Hamer, a 2016 Caldecott Honor book by Carol Boston Weatherford. All right, so check that book out if you're interested in finding out more about Fannie Lou Hamer. And the last name that I'm going to go over is Bayard Rustin, born in 1912. Bayard Rustin was posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest award an American citizen can attain, in 2013. Here's what President Obama's citation said. Bayard Rustin is an unyielding activist for civil rights, dignity, and equality for all. An advisor to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He promoted the nonviolent resistance, participated participated in one of the first freedom rides, organized the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedoms, and fought tirelessly for marginalized communities at home and abroad. And as an openly gay African American, Mr. Rustin stood at the intersection of several of the fights for equal rights. During his time, Rustin did not get the honor he was due, probably because he was gay. He was also a former communist. So, if you're interested in finding out more about him, there's a 2007 children's book about him called We Are One, the story of Bayard Rustin by Larry Dale Brynmer, aimed at readers 9 through 11. So if you are interested, again, just to recap, there are many names, that played a major key role in the civil rights movement. And on Dr. King's day, I think we would be remiss if we did not remember those names. If there's some names that were not mentioned, trust me, it wasn't left out intentionally. I just went through some of them that I found as I was doing a little research. Of course, we know of Medgar Evers. We know of Malcolm X. We know of all of these people who did great things. Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton in a later time. People who fought, some who died for civil rights, and so that people of all colors and all backgrounds could have equal rights. So thank you to those people. And on this day, make sure that you're not only just taking the day off, but you're doing something. Something to show respect and show, admiration for those people who came before us and gave so much so that we could have. I also want to leave with this thought. If you are a person who believed in what the civil rights stood for and what Dr. King stood for, I want you to make sure that you're considering your views as it pertains to people who are in the modern times still fighting for civil rights, still fighting for equal rights for all people, as it pertains to the treatment of African Americans in our country, treatment of people of African American backgrounds by the people who are paid to paid to protect and serve us. I've mentioned several times about Colin Kaepernick, and I do believe that if Dr. King was living today, one of the people he would be most proud of is Colin Kaepernick, and the willingness that he had to give up everything to stand for what he believed in. All right, he was willing to give up everything to stand up for what he believed in, even if it made people uncomfortable. Dr. King made people uncomfortable during his time. And we look back now and we say, well, what he was asking for, he was able to get. But during that time, when he took the stands that he took, it was not a very popular thing to do. We got to remember that. All right? So thank you to all the civil rights movements past, present, and future. Civil rights activists past, present, and future. If you are out there and you are fighting for the rights of people who need that support, please continue to do it and don't give up. Because your call and your voice is needed. Your voice is necessary. Never grow weary in well-doing. Do not grow weary in well-doing, because in due season you will reap if you faint not. That's in the word. All right? You will reap if you faint not. I'll say it one more time. Grow not weary in well-doing, for in due season you will reap if you faint not. All right? Remember, at the end of the day, if a man doesn't stand for something, he'll fall for anything. That's real talk. Thank you, Dr. King. Thank you, civil rights activists, past, present, and future. Peace.